Podcast time, baby. Featuring Sara Berkholtz, Part 1. All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is Michael Midnight, and as we are continuing on our topics for recruiting, today's topic is actually going to be placing talent. With us today, we do have Sara Berkholtz. Sara has successfully helped 900 professionals placing accountants, financial analysts, and managers. Sara, good morning. We're glad to have you with us.
Good morning. So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Glad to hear it. The first question I always like to ask with anybody who is in the recruiting field is, what was it really about recruiting that made you want to get into the field in the first place?
So like many other recruiting professionals, I kind of fell into the field. I was initially exposed to recruitment when I was working for the Office of New Student Programs at American University. I was charged with hiring a staff of 15 people to lead 3 months worth of events catering to thousands of people. And I caught the recruitment bug. I never went to college envisioning that I would get a degree in recruitment. That doesn't even exist. And I loved the feeling of helping other people obtain employment. It's the best feeling in the world. I really love recruitment a lot. And I love getting to connect people with jobs that will supply them the fuel to reach their goals, whether it's their financial goals or their career goals, and helping them find the perfect match. That kind of joy you just can't replicate in any other career.
Even just you explaining it sounds very motherly. Like you sound like a very motherly person that somebody would come to you and build them up and help them and really just point them in the right direction.
Yeah, I try to take an approach with all my candidates that hopefully that's in alignment with the positions that I'm recruiting for. And if not, then I'm happy to still give them any advice on their resume or interviewing style to hopefully help them for other positions that might come their way.
And I really do appreciate that. And I'm sure people who are looking for that type of assistance really would appreciate as well. You had a recent interview where you spoke at the Afghan embassy. You mentioned that you'd seen over 20,000 resumes. I'm guessing that's probably the same amount of cover letters to go with it as well. You mentioned that there is no such thing as a perfect resume and that every resume is in progress. What tactics or formats have you found to be the most responsive and reactive for the candidate search?
Oh, sure. Yes. In recruitment, there are really two formats of resumes, at least in the US. The first is a chronological resume, and the second is a functional resume. A chronological resume is one that you're most used to seeing. It goes from your work history from most recent to least recent, and it organizes your experience based on each position. Functional resume, however, is going to list all the different types of skills you have, whether it's customer service or administrative or accounting or finance, and it's going to list your prior experience under those functions. I find that more often than not, hiring managers prefer the chronological resume because it helps them understand when and where. However, I do think that there are good reasons to use a functional resume, especially if someone has had a gap of employment. Those are the cases where I think it's okay to use, but 98% of cases, your resume is probably going to look the best in chronological format. The best result you can have is a request to interview. Part of me saying that no resume is perfect, and a hiring manager, when they are looking at a resume, they're looking at the resume through the lens of the position that they're hiring for, and you don't mention anything about your financial analyst. I don't care how good your resume looks, you're probably not getting called in for an interview. If you choose chronological or functional, but you don't have the skill sets that the position requires, the outcome will probably become the same. You can adjust the content to match the position by really highlighting the skills that are necessary to meet the position requirements. There are a lot of tactics that you can use to tailor your resume to each position that you're applying to. Industry, I found, isn't necessarily the most predominant marker of why a candidate will be brought in for an interview as much as skill set. So if you have the skills and the experience necessary to complete the task, even if you come from a different industry, you can do chronological or functional. I will tell you that what is most important is where that skill set is at in terms of the location of your resume. So if you open up a file in Word, you normally will have the default setting of seeing the top 3/4 of the first page of your resume. When a manager is looking at a resume, and there's a lot of research that suggests that a manager and a recruiter will look at a resume for 6 seconds or less, they're not necessarily scrolling through your entire resume. So that initial first 3/4 of that first page is what is necessary to make a good impression. If you can squeeze your experience on a chronological or a functional resume, then I think that you've got a good format overall.
Awesome. Recently, I've heard a lot of recruiters trying to tailor down to a one-page type resume setup. Is that something that you're in favor of, or what's your thought process on that?
There are always going to be exceptions to the rule. I think that, when you are applying to a position that requires 15 plus years of experience, you're going to need more than one page. I think that pretty much any professional can keep their resume between 1 to 2 pages. I find that resumes that exceed 3 pages, typically that top 3/4 of the first page is not being utilized effectively at all. And I find that people with really long, drawn-out resumes are not going to be called in for interviews as much as people with a shorter resume. So my rule of thumb is keep it to 1 to 2 pages. If you have less than 10 years of experience, 1 page is definitely sufficient. More than 10 years of experience, or if you're in certain fields like academia or medicine, you might need more real estate on your resume to fit all the qualifications necessary. If you are in any kind of publishing role, or if you have samples of work that you need to include, rather than saving it under your resume document, I would just recommend having a completely separate document to consider rather than trying to fit everything onto your resume.
As opposed to having supporting documentation of like a portfolio or some supporting metrics to show, you would say to actually separate these two as opposed to not just combining them all into one document.
With your resume, you always want to incorporate accomplishments throughout the body of your resume. So rather than just saying that you performed financial analysis, you could say in that same bullet point, in the same amount of space, that you performed financial analysis for a $3 billion company managing a budget of $200,000, just an example. But if your resume is incorporating other factors that aren't relevant to your accomplishments, such as publications, the longest resumes I always see are those that are involved in international relations, academia, or medicine. And they're so long because they are including their published works and things like that. That is all really great stuff to showcase your expertise, but it doesn't need to be in the same file as the resume.
Okay. Another good thing that actually has been brought up more and more is company culture. Is company culture itself, as you're working with candidates and placing talent, is that something that you really try to just explore with the company that you are seeking talent for?
So company culture in the recruitment industry I don't think has really properly been defined. People just throw out company culture as the same name as like their mission or commonalities between their employees. To me, company culture means it's an indicator of how people treat each other. That to me is what culture is defined as. How do people treat each other? Different companies have different ways of treating each other. There are more casual companies where people can treat each other more friendly in terms of more of a casual friend-like stance. And there are company cultures that are a little bit more professional and buttoned up. And in terms of finding talent, you want to find talent that will want to work in a place where they are comfortable being treated in that way. So if an employee is very buttoned up and uncomfortable in a casual environment, the likelihood that they're going to stay in that environment for very long is very low. And vice versa, if an employee is super casual and they're in a very buttoned up environment, how likely is it that they're going to last more than a year or so? And I think that goes in with retention, building a community where people treat each other on a mutual basis. A lot of people look at culture and they try and find people that are exactly like each other. And I think that's counterintuitive to company growth. If you have a company where everyone thinks and acts the same way, that is not conducive to growth. However, if you have people that are comfortable relating to each other in a certain way, but have different thoughts and opinions and backgrounds, that's where I think companies will best grow and profit from.
I can't agree more with that statement. It covers everything that I've had on my mind and even that I have dealt. It just reminds me personally, I had a contract that I went in for, design and marketing contract, where it was a smaller company, local, like a fishing shop type thing. And the guy seemed pretty straightforward when I talked to him, very nice guy. It was just a very quiet atmosphere and not a lot of people seemed like they were talking. I understand places are busy and I've worked where, suit and tie in New York City and casual polo and jeans in the office this as well. But I just remember him talking about how it's really great company culture and how he's really, he really invests in his employees. This was a 1099 position that he was offering. There was no paid time off. There was no benefits. There wasn't really anything else. So I was just confused when I heard it. I'm like, how exactly are you investing in your employees? It just, the message that he was relaying didn't match the one that was actually there.
Wow, that was helpful. Tune in next week to see Sarah's final thoughts on resume arrangements for success and seeking out a good fit for your next employment opportunity. Have a question yourself for Sarah? You can find her on Twitter every Friday answering those burning hot topics of interest at Ask Sarah B. AskSarabee. Have your own recruiter or candidate story that you want to share with us? If you are listening on YouTube, comment below. If you're listening on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, or your podcast app of choice, feel free to email your experience to go@miketech.tv. You can also find our full conversation of this episode on YouTube at youtube.com/MikeTech Studios. That's MIKTEK Studios. Thanks for checking out this episode, and feel free to like, subscribe, and share our content. And until next episode, this is Michael Midnight. Class dismissed.